I realized a very long time ago that I listened to music differently than other people, or than most people. For most people, music is part of the landscape of your surroundings. It's your environment. And people look for music that reflects their lives and their environment. I have always gravitated toward music that is strange, that does not represent my environment, that represents a window into a different world. The more exotic and the more surprising, the more I like it. This was brought home to me early on when I was 12 years old. My mother drove me to pick up a girl to take her to a party. And I went into her house, and her mother was there. She said, "Oh, Nancy's upstairs, she's getting dressed, she's not ready yet. Come on into the kitchen." And I went into the kitchen, and there was a radio on in the kitchen. And just as we went into the kitchen, I heard for the first time a record called "Only You" by the Platters. And for many of you, for some of you, not probably you, that's very familiar. Everybody knows it. It's a standard, it's an oldie, it's a classic rock and roll doo-wop record. And it starts with a falsetto. Only you. I can't sing, but you get the idea. And I think that moment was the very first moment where the African-American male falsetto appeared on the pop charts. It was a very strange and new sound. And I looked at the radio in that moment, and I went, "Wow, what's that? That's great." And Nancy's mother looked at the radio, and she went, "Oh, what's that? That's kind of weird and slightly unnerving." That was her expression on her face. Music reaches across every kind of boundary of speech, habit of life. Just, it communicates in ways that is wonderful, and for many people, quite unnerving, and can be quite disturbing, and can be quite something that upsets society or portions of society. One of my favorite stories about this took place in the 80s, back in the day before everything was bought on Amazon, when people used to go to stores all the time to buy things. And of course, that meant that shopping malls, shopping centers were a huge social hub in those days. Everybody would go hang out at the mall. And there was an area in America where people got upset because young people who weren't buying anything were hanging out at the mall in groups, sometimes dressed in hoodies, sometimes not representing the kind of face that they wanted to see at the mall. And so somebody developed this gadget, which was a very, very high-pitched whine. It was such a high frequency that adults whose hearing deteriorates, your hearing deteriorates in the high frequencies as you get older. Adults could not hear this whine, but teenagers could, and it was maddening. And so they would generate this whine in the shopping mall, and the teenagers would scatter. And that's what they wanted. But of course, some do-gooder civil rights lawyer got a hold of this idea and sued them, said, "You can't do that." And so they had to stop. And the teenagers and the hoodies and groups of non-consuming youth started gathering in the mall again. And they felt, we have to come up with some answer. And they did. They came up with Baroque music. They started playing Bach and Mozart and Vivaldi quite loud on the PA system of the shopping mall, and it had exactly the same effect as the high-pitched whine. Teenagers could not stand it. They just left, and it solved the problem. And I think to this day, there are Midwestern states in America where you go to a shopping mall and you still hear classical music as a kind of prophylactic against large gatherings of teenagers. And the whole issue of the texture of the sound of music, whether it's familiar to you, whether it makes you feel good, whether it makes you feel like you're part of something, or whether it makes you feel like you're excluded from something, is something that colors the way we respond to music in every kind of context. Another favorite anecdote of mine is some of you, not you kids, but some people here may remember when Buena Vista Social Club was all over the place. Everybody all over the world was listening to this wonderful Cuban record. It won a Grammy. It was the Latin Record of the Year. It was sold millions of copies. And all during that time, on commercial Latin radio in America, the number of plays that Buena Vista Social Club received on commercial Latin radio was 0. Because it was old-fashioned. That's what the sort of public radio audience, the nice middle-class world music audience, those record buyers, that's what they loved about it, was it represented an older Cuba, an older world. And that's exactly what a young Latin, Hispanic American audience hated about it, was that it was old-fashioned. It wasn't the latest thing. And right around the same time, I think it was a year before, a year after, there was a film called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, which was set in the American South, and it was full of a great soundtrack of country music. And that record won Country Music Record of the Year, an Oscar, a Grammy, sold millions of copies, and was played on country music radio in America 0 times. Nashville hated that record so much. And you know, if you arrived from Mars and you played somebody a George Jones or a modern country record, and you played them, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, you know, they couldn't really tell the difference. But people could immediately. The texture of that record was so vividly backward looking, as opposed to the texture of the hits on country radio, which were modern. In the world music scene that I have been part of in London, there have been a lot of attempts to get. Nice to see you kids. I understand this is probably a little boring. If you're I know people who put on festivals called under the heading, I'll just wait till the noise. Bye, kids. They put on festivals of immigrant music in which they've gotten groups from different immigrant communities to bring the best of their musicians to the South Bank. Coin Street used to do this every year, every summer. And they would galvanize, the whole community would come out to support the musicians that came to play. South Asian, Middle Eastern, West Indian, African. And every year they tried so hard to persuade the people who came out to support their own culture's music to stick around and listen to the next group. Never. Never. They always just got up and left. And then another group would come and sit down and listen to that culture's music. The disconnects between different cultural perceptions of music can be very subtle, but they're so clear. Music communicates its texture instantly in the way it's played, the kind of context, the attitude, the attack on the instruments, the way it's sung. I remember in the 80s, the beloved radio figure in Britain, Charlie Gillett, loved this record by a Sudanese singer. His name escapes me at the moment. And he was coming to London to do a concert. And Charlie promoted this concert on his radio show. And at the same time, the Sudanese community was very excited about the concert as well. And so it was a rare moment of triumph, in a way, of marketing of world music. The Queen Elizabeth Hall has about 1,000 seats. 500 of those seats were occupied by world music fans who had listened to Charlie Gillett's show, and 500 of those seats were occupied by Sudanese. And the group came out and sat in a semicircle on the stage, and the singer, Ali Hassan Al-Kuban was his name. He came up to the microphone, and I think he was playing an oud, and the opening of the first song was kind of free rhythm, and he improvised on the oud, and he sang a kind of beautiful introduction. Everybody, Sudanese, English people, were gripped. And at the end of this introduction, he turned to one of the musicians and he nodded, and the musician pushed a button on a machine, and it started this sort of Arabic beat on a drum machine. And you could just see all of the Charlie Gillett people in the audience go, oh. And all the Sudanese go, yeah. And over the course of the next half an hour, as the drum machine kept up its thing, one by one, all the Charlie Gillett fans got up and tiptoed out. And the Sudanese, they were looking, and they were so happy that we were all here together, that there was a full house for their hero. And every time somebody would get up and leave, they would look like, what's your problem? Where are you going? This is fantastic. Are you nuts? And the Charlie Gillett people were looking at them going, sorry, but that drum machine just is not what we came for. We came to hear the rhythm of that music played by real people on tarambuka, on a flute, without the aid of machines. That's why we like this stuff. This dichotomy plays out across our culture. I know plenty of people who go on holidays, they choose to go to places which are unspoiled. They want to eat the real food, they want to experience the real culture. And they go to eat at a restaurant in some faraway country where the mother cooks food the way her mother and her grandmother cooked food. And the kids who are working in the kitchen and helping out, they can't wait for the KFC to open down the street. That will be a great moment. And the same thing happens, within this country. The way we talk about food, the way we talk about, the fact that the middle classes, the people who read The Observer and learn about organic food and learn about healthy eating, eat completely differently from people who don't read those sort of things, who just respond to TV ads for the Whopper, and who can only afford a Whopper. They can't afford, And there's this divide which governs our culture and our world. And it manifests itself in many fascinating and different ways. One of the earliest manifestations of wars over music was when the sort of respectable establishment was alarmed and shocked by a new dance that they thought was too sexual, too provocative, that allowing their children to do this dance would lead to immorality. And therefore they tried to suppress this dance. And I bet you'll be very surprised to hear what dance I'm talking about. I'm talking about the waltz. In the early 19th century, the waltz was a peasant dance that was taken up by certain circles in Vienna. And people in respectable society started dancing the waltz. And before that, you know, if you went to a dance, the best chance you had of touching the hand of your beloved or somebody you wanted to meet or get to know was in a minuet or a quadrille, you know, touching one finger like this. And all of a sudden with a waltz, you're like this, and there's this sensual 3-4 times sweeping you around the hall and making you dizzy with romance and emotion. And, you know, it was absolutely shocking, absolutely horrifying. And the same thing was repeated regularly with new dances over the course of the 19th century. And then came, oh my God, the tango, which was just absolutely beyond the pale and was such a sensation when it hit Paris. Just in 1912, it arrived. Argentinians, there were rich Argentinians who made a fortune in beef, who went to spend it in Paris. And they taught Parisians the tango. And it swept Paris, became a sensation. In 1913, the Queen here, the Pope, and the Tsar all demanded and received tango demonstrations. But the Bishop of Argentina, I think, said that anybody who danced the tango would be excommunicated. The tango was just one manifestation of what has been the dominant trend in music in the past 150 years. Those wonderful salons and courts where people did those courtly dances where they only touched their partner with a finger. The money that paid for those courts, that put the gilding on all those Baroque splendor that those people danced under, was, of course, paid for by colonization. And colonization could only be done effectively by the bringing in of slaves from Africa. And so it was slavery that really paid for the luxurious, respectable world which was shocked by the arrival of the waltz, and then shocked by the arrival of the tango. And in a nice sort of twist, of course, the dominant theme of the last 150 years musically has been the inexorable capturing of the world's ears by music derived from those very slaves, from African culture that was brought to America, Latin America, North America, mixed with European musical forms, and has created probably 90% of the music that we listen to today is derived from that process. And Western society has this sort of very ambivalent feeling about that. You know, people love Aretha Franklin, and they love salsa music, and they love rhythm and blues, and they love all these forms, but we don't want you to marry my daughter. there's a tension between how much we endorse the music and the texture and the rhythms that came from Africa, and how much society resists it. There's a wonderful series of exchange of letters between Ernest Hemingway and his mother. His mother was his real champion. She's the one who fought off his father to allow him to become a writer. And then he went off and served in the ambulance corps in the First World War. And when he got back, he went to Chicago to become a reporter. And his very first stories that he wrote were all based on his experiences in the war, where, and they're gruesome. And his mother writes to him. She was a Christian Scientist who, Christian Science believes that if you don't talk about it, if you don't give it reality, it doesn't exist. And why, Ernest? Why? Why are you forcing us to confront ugliness and brutality and blood and all this? And his answers imply that really not just he's been shaken to his core by experiences on the battlefield, but he's also been shaken by his experiences on the south side of Chicago. He's experienced African American culture. He's hung out in jazz clubs. And what that music spoke to him, what it said to him, was that it was willing to confront reality, that it had an authenticity about it, and it had a willingness to look reality and life in all of its complexity and all of its sensuality and all of its violence and everything, look it in the eye. And the music that he heard on the south side of Chicago had a huge effect on the whole ethos of literature in the 20s and what we now consider to be modernity. And the connection of music to a ground, to a place, to a culture. In a way, the slave trade was one of the first things that confused this whole picture. If you go back to music that in the Balkans, for example, now you can listen to music from Bosnia and see that it's actually halfway between Serbia and Bulgaria and Serbia and Greece, and it sounds like that. It sounds like the geography. It sounds as you can absolutely tell where a music is located, what it's between, what it's far from, what it's near, close to. All these influences happened naturally over centuries and centuries. But now, first you had this huge removal of people from their home to a new place to create something completely new that had the effect over the course of the 20th century of dominating this modern thing called popular music that could be communicated through media instead of by people just playing, just going to the next valley and playing at a dance. And our connection to the earth through music has become more and more tenuous. The more and more we have Spotify, the more and more we can hear anything from all over the world, the less and less we have a connection to the music of the land. But it's still very, very strong. It's amazing how these textures that go back centuries communicate so clearly. Somebody can tell immediately just the way I could in that kitchen, recognize that I was drawn to the sound of the Platters singing Only You, and the mother was immediately repelled by it. It was only 5 seconds of music, and those two reactions were formed. Music gives you that, you can tell so much instantly, the minute you hear the texture. Anyway, I'll finish by saying that it is the modern technology is but one of the things which separating us from this. We also have the problem of evangelical and puritanical Salafist and evangelical preaching, which is determined to suppress music that comes from the history of a culture, because it's against their vision of the way society should be. And almost an equal threat comes from the embrace of tradition by forces on the right, by the British National Party selling Sandy Denny records on their website because they think she connects to true Britishness. True tradition, musical tradition, in my experience, knowing so many musicians all over the world, they are so open to other cultures, to other peoples. Music that comes from a place opens up the world. It doesn't close off the world. I think I'll end on that note. I think we're up out of time.